I never thought I would see the day, but I made a 1950s longline bullet bra. I can't believe it. Why did I do this, and what have I learned about vintage bras from this experience? I have been feeling the draw towards creating a more cohesive everyday wardrobe, and that has led me towards wanting to create a vintage 1940s to 50s style wardrobe. Now, if you've been around on this channel for any amount of time, you will know that I love creating foundation garments. So in the past, that has been corsets and stays, but in the case of the 1940s and 50s, bras, girdles, and garter belts were more commonly worn as a foundation garment. So I decided to dive in and make a long line 1950s bra with that iconic 50s bullet bra shape and a center front closure. Now, if you would like to learn more about the theory behind vintage bras, how they differ from modern bras, and why I think they are better and more supportive than modern bras, check out my previous video, which will be linked in the description. In this video, I will be sharing how I drafted the pattern for this bra to my measurements and made a mock-up. I'll share the type of fabric I decided to use, how I sewed the bra with a vintage reproduction look using vintage lingerie techniques, how I like the finished bra upon wearing it compared to modern bras, and finally how I did some unexpected but necessary alterations to the finished bra. Stay tuned to the end to hear all of these things. Let's dive into the making process. When I saw this stunning longline 50s inspired bullet bra from the brand What Katie Did, I was immediately inspired and I knew I had to draft my own version of it. Using my favorite drafting book, Metric Pattern Cutting, I started with a lingerie bodice block and altered it to create my own version of this longline 1950s bullet bra, using instructions in the book for drafting bra cups. And I actually did most of my drafting of this pattern on the beach, which was a really nice time. After I drafted the pattern, I taped the pieces together as a paper mock-up. And then I separated the paper pieces and created a mock-up. Okay, so I created my mock-up just out of a single layer of white cotton and a zipper in front. And after trying it on, I decided the fit was pretty good, though I did go on to alter the bra cups a little bit, which may or may not have been an error, as you will see at the end of this video. Okay, so it's time to cut out my fabric for the final bra. I'm using some lovely cotton batiste for my stash, which is a very lovely, light, satiny type of cotton. And I'm just laying out my pattern pieces, which are net, which means that there is no seam allowance included. So I am first tracing the stitching line. This is how I like to make all of my corset patterns for greater accuracy. This garment is actually fairly similar to a corset. After adding my seam allowance, I am just cutting out those pieces. And of course, for the second half of the pattern pieces I have to cut out, I just use the first half as a guide to cut around. And here are all of my cut out pieces. Cutting out some more of those bra cups, bra cup panels. There are 4 bra cup panels per side. Okay, so I began by flatlining because I actually used 2 layers of the cotton batiste for all of my panels. The cotton batiste was fairly light, so I just decided it would be a better bet to do it this way. And I also began by edge stitching or stay stitching around all of my pieces to make sure that they wouldn't stretch, since most of these edges are on the bias. Stay stitching is simply where you stitch with a small stitch length very close to the stitching line, but just outside of it. And now I'm beginning to stitch together some of my body panels, making making sure to pin right along those stitching lines that I marked earlier. And here are the seams all sewn, and it's time to turn those seams into flat felled seams, which will also create boning channels that we'll use later. So I'm pressing them with a mini iron and a pressing cloth, trimming down those seam allowances on one half, and just making sure the channel will be wide enough for the boning channel. And then pressing down the seam to create the felled seam before taking it to the sewing machine and carefully stitching. Not only will this create channels for boning, but it also creates a very smooth and much stronger seam than if it was just sewn with one pass only. And here is basically the frame of the bra. You can see the spaces where the cups will later be, and it's all ready to go now. Okay, so it's time to create our cups. So here I'm just showing you again how I did the stay stitching on each of those panels before beginning to assemble them. This would ensure no stretching was happening. And now I have pressed under the edges, and I'm actually top stitching very close to that fold. This is because I'm using a vintage lingerie technique called bridging, which is actually going to involve some decorative hand stitching to create sort of a bridged seam between the cup panels, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So now the edges are all neatly finished with the top stitching. Okay, so now I'm going to be creating this lingerie technique, vintage lingerie technique called bridging that I showed you about. So using some pearl cotton embroidery floss and a needle, I am just creating the bridging effect, which basically uses crisscross stitches. If you'd like to learn more about this technique, I will link a helpful blog post below. And now it's time to create our circular stitching for the bra cups. This is an imperative step in creating any type of bullet bra cups, as it helps create that conical shape to the cups, as well as making them more supportive and more just having that nice bra cup shape, even though it's made of 4 separate panels. So I began by tracing a toonie to create the first circle in the very center, and I'm stitching around that, and then every circle after that I'm just using my sewing machine foot as a guide for how far away to stitch from the circle that I just did before. And here is the finished cup. Okay, so now we have our body frame and we have our bra cups, and it's time to put them all together. So I have my finished bra cup with the circular stitching, and I'm just carefully pinning that in place into the curved area on the body frame that's designed for the cup. And most of all, I'm making sure that the seams of the cup lines up with the seams of the frame. So it's all pinned and basted in place now. You can see how pointy that cup is looking at this point. And now I'm just very carefully sewing it at the machine and then trimming down that seam allowance. Here's what it looks like with the top frame in place. Pressing it now with a pressing cloth. Just wanted to be very careful with this fabric whenever I was pressing on the right side that I didn't burn it. So now I'm using just some white linen bias tape that I cut out for this project, and I'm finishing that sort of underwire type seam, although it does not contain underwire, with some bias tape. And now I'm basting it in place just to make sure it's sitting properly for the second round of stitching, and then carefully stitching that side of the bias tape down. Not only does this finish the seam, but it helps it give a little more structure and stability to this area. And that's what it looks like when it's all finished. So now I'm finishing up the top frame area of the bra, so the part that goes over the top of the cups. So I'm adding an extra layer of fabric, sewing that right sides together and then turning it under to finish off that top triangular edge there. And of course pressing it. And I added some understitching as well, just to finish it off very smoothly. And now I am just sewing down that final edge on the inside with hand stitches using an invisible catch stitch. And here's what it's looking like at this point. We're almost there. Okay, so it's time to add some boning. Now the original bra that I was inspired by did have some visible boning that was in that top frame area. This almost acts as a sort of overwire, which adds some support and stability to the cup shape. So I added a channel to that top frame area, cutting my boning to length. And of course I made very sure to finish off these edges nice and rounded. And now I'm using my heat gun to actually slightly bend this piece of boning. So I'm heating it up and then using my fingers to bend it slightly just so it would fit the shape of that center front neckline area of the bra. Okay, and here's what it's looking like now. It has a lot more structure now that that boning's been added to that V neckline area of the bra. So now let's talk about the center front closure. I used some white hook and eye tape, which made this pretty simple. And you can see I already have the one side stitched on, so now I'm using it as a guide to determine the placement of the second side. So I have that all pinned in place now. And I'm just very carefully on my sewing machine sewing it down. And not only will this attach the hook and eye tape, but it will also form a boning channel. I'm actually going to insert boning right in that hook and eye tape, as well as in the other channels, as you can see here. And now I'm just adding on my machine what's called a stop, which as you can see is just a line of stitching to stop the boning from wiggling around in the channels. I added this placket under the hook and eye tape to make sure that there was no visible gapping showing my skin underneath, as well as protecting my skin from the hook and eyes. Okay, so to finish the bottom edge, I added a facing, which would act as a casing for the bottom waist edge. And this casing would hold some waist elastic, some waistband type of elastic. And so I'm using a zigzag stitch to stitch that elastic onto the facing before turning it upwards and hand stitching it to the inside of the bra. That's what it looks like from the outside. So it just adds some cushioning at that waistline area so nothing will be cutting into my waistline. And that's what it looks like on the inside. Okay, so the top edge, the part that was not finished by that frame around the cups, I am just finishing with some bias tape. Now let's talk about the straps. I created my own straps using matching cotton batiste fabric cut on the straight of grain, which I interfaced and then pressed in half and pressed the edges under and stitched it like that to finish it off. And I am just hand stitching these straps in place. I found instructions in a lovely vintage lingerie handbook for how to hand stitch straps on invisibly from the outside. So here is the finished bra. I absolutely love how it turned out. It definitely has a real vintage reproduction look, which is what I was going for, and just showing you all of the lovely details of this finished longline 50s inspired bra. Here's what it looks like under some vintage style clothing.
Okay, so how do I like this 1950s bullet bra? After completing the necessary alterations to the finished bra, which I will talk about in a moment, I love this bra. It gives a very similar bust silhouette and shape to my historical corsets, which is really surprising, and I absolutely love that. In my mind, this instantly makes this bra better than all of my modern bras, which fail to come anywhere close to the support of a corset. I will say that due to its waist cinching effect, it will ideally need to be paired with a vintage boned garter belt or something of that sort to balance the effect on my lower body. Now, it is a little tricky to get on and off, which I talked about the mechanics more of in my previous vintage bra video, which again is linked in the description. Okay, so let's talk about some necessary but very scary alterations that I had to do to the finished bra. Okay, so despite this being a bullet bra, I did decide to alter this bra to make it a little less pointy. I did the alteration with invisible hand stitches in such a way that I can undo it later if I so choose, which surprisingly makes no visible lumps or bumps when the bra is worn. Okay, so why did I do this alteration? Is there something inherently wrong with bullet bras or inherently weird looking? No, of course not. I did this alteration partly because of my own taste and comfort level, given the modern world we live in where pointy boobs are not in vogue, but mostly though because I could have done a better job with the pointed cup shape if I had done another mock-up or two and refined the shape a bit more. It just wasn't pulling off that iconic, attractive bullet bra shape. It just looked kind of weird because, again, the pattern really could have used some more refinement. Okay, so also along the same lines of this bra really needing some more mock-ups to be done, the bra turned out uncomfortably tight in the bottom line, the waist area, especially considering that it didn't even end up landing right on my actual waist, but a bit above my waist. So the measurement ended up being 26 inches, which is kind of a tight waist measurement for me. So if it had actually landed on my waist, it would have probably been more comfortable. It would have been doing some cinching action, but at least it would have been on my actual waist. However, it ended up being like up here that it ended, and the higher up you go up your rib cage, the wider your measurements become. So it was just not feasible. Okay, so how on earth did I alter the waist? I decided, short of just never wearing this bra and just completely making a new one and starting from scratch, my only option was to do the very scary thing of taking scissors and cutting 2 slits into the side panels of the bra and then adding in some extra triangular godets of fabric. So they tapered to nothing at the rib cage where I did not need any more room, and then they became a couple centimeters wide at the bottom line of the bra. And upon making that alteration, the bra is much more comfortable and much more wearable for me, so that's a good thing. All's well that ends well. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, as it will signal to YouTube that this is valuable content that is worth promoting to other viewers like yourself. The accompanying blog post will be linked below, as well as all of my social media links. You can follow me on those if you are interested. And I would also like to reiterate that if you would like more details about the support level of this bra, then definitely check out my previous video all about the fit of vintage bras, which will be linked in the description. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.